name is Chirstobel Suanders, and I'm Professor of Surgery at Royal Melbourne Hospital in Peel Mac.
Hello, my name is Robyn Guymer, and I'm a medical retinal ophthalmologist at the Royal Victorian Eye and Ear Hospital. Having trained at Melbourne University as a medical student, then the Royal Melbourne Hospital, and then I did a PhD at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, and then I did my ophthalmology training at the Royal Victorian Eye and Ear Hospital, and then I finished with a fellowship in retinal diseases in Moorfields Eye Hospital in London.
Just by way of introduction, my name is Daniel Gould. I'm a PGY3 orthopaedic resident at St Vincent's Hospital, and I finished my PhD halfway through internship, so 2 years ago.
Well, I guess that started very early on in my career when I had some great mentors who advised me to go and do some research, and I started at the Royal Marsden Hospital and Institute of Cancer Research, and opened up for me the amazing and wide world of research. But I guess the one moment in my career that really made me think, wow, research can change everything, was being in a very small way involved in a big clinical trial of a new cancer treatment, and seeing the very first results in a room together with other people who'd been part of the clinical trial, and seeing those survival curves separate. So we knew that people who'd been on the interventional arm of the trial actually did better. And once you start to see the effects on patients and on the patients that you're looking after, that really does consolidate for you how important research is in all of medicine. And to be part of that is a very thrilling process.
And what inspired me to become a clinician researcher really was when I was a fellow in my final training years at the eye hospital in Moorfields. I realised that for many of our diseases, there really was not any treatment, and people lost vision despite coming and seeking advice. And I decided then it was probably more likely that I would help more people by doing research into one of these conditions than to sit in the clinic all day and basically deliver bad news that there was nothing that I could do to save their vision. As a result of that, I came back and started the Macular Research Unit at the Centre for Eye Research Australia, where I've been for the last 28 years.
Being a clinician researcher makes a lot of sense to me. We do medical degrees, we're scientists, we're interested in answering questions. Being a researcher basically involves having an inquisitive mind and wanting to answer questions. As a junior researcher, I was inspired by the people around me, and we did some interesting experiments looking at catheter balloons, whether it mattered if saline or water was used to fill them. As a more senior clinician researcher, we conducted trials comparing PSMA and MRI. So it's very fulfilling to be able to accomplish research and participate in trials and then go and present them overseas. The other benefits of being a researcher are that you get to meet a lot of like-minded people in your specialty, but also in other areas where they are the expert, like radiologists, radiation oncologists, medical engineers, health economists. So you're always learning at the same time. Being able to present your research overseas is a really good excuse to travel and see the world as well. In regards to the research load, I don't believe it differs between specialties. I think within any specialty, there will always be interesting questions that need to be answered. And so I would definitely not be choosing my specialty based on what the research load is.
So what advice would I have for someone wanting to be a clinician scientist? Well, I think in terms of attributes, I think perseverance and resilience and dedication probably far outweigh sheer academic brilliance and intelligence. I think it's not an easy road to be a clinician scientist. You don't get a lot of positive reinforcement. There are a lot of grants that you don't get, a lot of papers that are rejected. And so I think having a very secure idea of what you're doing and why you're doing it, so that you can remain positive and resilient and continue, are very important skills. I would also suggest that you surround yourself by very smart people, because you cannot do everything yourself, and you really need a group of people that are working to a common goal. So important that you lead by example, that they can understand your passion for what it is that you're looking for, and that they can feel that same passion for why they get up and come to work every day. I also think you need to be certain that you're not going to be worried about comparing your salary with your colleagues that are perhaps in full-time private practice, to understand that it is not money that gets you out of bed every day, and so to be comfortable with that decision will be important.
Well, I think when it comes to assessing which career path aligns best with your strengths, interests, and goals, it really starts with self-reflection, reflecting on what tasks energize you, what skills you're naturally really good at, and what environments bring out your best performance. Often this kind of reflection takes a little bit of time. It really takes some observation from your day-to-day activities, but also taking the time to seek feedback from your mentors, your colleagues, your friends and your family, to ultimately get a more well-rounded perspective of what these strengths are. And then finally, it's about aligning those with different career pathways. And that can only happen through experience. During your medical school years, being on different placements, spending time on different placements, speaking to registrars, junior doctors, even consultants about their experiences within those career paths, ultimately gives you a better understanding of where your career path may end up. If it's not medical, then it's also about taking the time to reach out for opportunities. It may come from internships, it may come from on-site work experience, but it also may come from doing research. There are a lot of YouTube videos and other online resources these days, which gives you a really good understanding, or at least some insight into different career paths that may be of interest to you and may ultimately align with your personal strengths, interests, and goals.
And then finally, how do you find a research opportunity? I think you would look and at areas you're interested in, see who's doing the research in that area, who's doing well, read their papers, don't just look at their website. And then I would contact them and show your interest and your initiative by perhaps suggesting things that you might like to look at, and basically make contact and show that you truly are interested and available if they were happy to meet you.
Well, as for research opportunities, I really suggest to start locally. Talk to your consultants or registrars or university supervisors about ongoing projects, as ultimately ongoing or established projects are the easiest ones to slot yourself into. But at the same time, think laterally. Are there departmental advertisements? Are there hospital research units? Are there research beyond some of those specialties or career pathways you may be interested in? Ultimately, the goal of research is to really answer questions that we need more clarity on. And the process for research is very similar between different disciplines. And so gathering experience in research to ultimately boost your skill set to be able to conduct research later on is an opportunity in itself. I think secondly, with that question though, is where can I find research opportunities, is to really think to yourself why you're doing research. When it comes to research, often there is a misguided understanding that research is a stepping stone or a pathway to a certain career that you'd like. But in the modern day medical system, this is becoming less true. And as a result, research opportunities are more designed for people who have a genuine interest or passion in the research process. And ultimately, this is what will create more fulfillment for junior members of academia or clinical medicine to ultimately find themselves in a academic career going forward.
How do I go about balancing being a researcher along with being a clinician? Well, you know, you're actually more than that. You're also an educator, you're also an administrator, you're also a leader. And of course, clinical work as a surgeon always needs to take first place, but you do need to make time if you want to do research to be able to do that. And often that means ring fencing some of the time that you have in your day or even in your evening or weekends, but being passionate about what you do and setting out for yourself some real goals. So you know that you need to get that data analyzed, you need to write that paper, you need to get a bunch of people on board to do your grant application. Whatever it may be, and you have a deadline. For me, that's important, but also having a team around, so people to help, and you're not a lone person doing it all by yourself. So a team of other researchers, but also people to help with some of the administrative side. So working in a group and in a department where research is going on is a really important thing, I think, to help that research journey. So good luck to all of you. If you do want to be a surgeon and do research, there is nothing better in a surgical career than to combine both.
Next question for me is, what is the MD PhD program? So for me, I was officially the first person to sign up to the MD PhD program at the University of Melbourne, at Melbourne Medical School in 2019. And back then, the basic idea was to intercalate a PhD into the MD course. So what I was going to be doing was deferring my final year of medical school by 3 years. And the way it worked back then was that the second half of your third year of medical school was part-time research, and the first half of your final year of medical school was full-time research. So the final 6 months of my PhD, where I'd be writing up my thesis, so the final sort of 3.5 year PhD program, would be my thesis write-up time, and that would count as my research component of the MD. Then I would go to transition to practice and then graduate the MD. Didn't pan out that way for me, so I ended up finishing my MD at the planned time. So it took 7 years as opposed to 4 years because I had deferred from official clinical placements and I was enrolled in an elective subject, so that I was indemnified and I could still do placements. But then I ended up finishing my PhD after I completed the MD. What it basically means for me is that you are making the decision to prolong your MD, put more of an emphasis on research, and then return to it later in order to return to the clinical side of things later after you've finished at least a vast majority of your research. Now, I think there are lots of different ways to do that. So, like me, you could essentially defer 3 years, do a small amount of clinical placement. For me, that was complicated by the fact that COVID lockdown started in Melbourne 6 months into my PhD. So, any clinical placements I had were very interspersed with periods of lockdown. I remember being in the emergency department for a placement one night and being sent home halfway through my planned shift because non-essential staff had to go home because we went into a lockdown partway through that what was my placement, and then that was the reality for the next few months. So it was kind of online clinical exposure and things like that, but not much for large periods. But basically, I think the key distinguishing feature for me is, and this is the reason that I decided to do it, is because people can do a PhD, before they do medicine, they can do it during training, they can do it once they've completed training and they're a junior consultant, they can do it at any point in their career. There's no right or wrong time to do it. The thing that made the decision for me to do an MD PhD was that I wanted to get the bulk of the studies done, my study time, so doing formal degrees, out of the way early. So if I can do the PhD and do the MD and then continue my research down the line, at least I've done that hefty research degree and put a lot of time into it, such that I can still do more research, I can still pursue other opportunities, but I'm not having to step aside from clinical roles in order to really learn the ropes and figure all this out, because I know from experience that was very time consuming, very taxing. So that's what the PhD meant to me. It was a way of essentially lumping together the major degrees that I was planning on doing in my life, so that I could get it all out of the way at once, basically, and then go back to focus predominantly on clinical work and learning clinical medicine. And again, there's no right or wrong way to do it, but for me, what that meant was that I have a base in research and I have ongoing projects and I have capacity to take on more projects because I've already learned how to do research and how to juggle multiple things. So that alongside my clinical work, I can handle that and I can keep things going, and I have sort of irons in the fire in terms of research, so that I'm continuing to progress throughout the rest of my career as I get back into clinical medicine. So that's how it works for me. These days, you can do the MD PhD program. I think there's a few different variants of it in terms of starting after first year and then integrating formal blocks of your MD program. So like a 6-month block of your coursework into interspersing your PhD with those parts of the MD, or starting after second year and doing a similar thing but having a longer initial period in the research. So there's a few different ways to do it, but what it basically means is that you are doing your research alongside learning clinical medicine. So the question is, what is the MD PhD program? I think there is no the MD PhD program. There are multiple different ways to do it, and there's no right way to do it, and there's no wrong way to do it. But yeah, it's the fact that you are choosing to both do a coursework type program in the MD and a research-based program in the PhD simultaneously, which can actually complement each other quite well, I think. Um, Final question is, how important is mentorship, and how do you find a mentor? How did I find a mentor? So I think mentorship to me is extremely important, but it's hard to define. I think there are several people in my life who I would count as having a mentoring role, who may not even know that they have that role in my life, but they are the sort of people that I talk to, and they can offer me insight, not necessarily advice, but insights, and just a different perspective, um, and can offer just stories from their experience and the way that they process things, and certain things may resonate with me. And again, some people don't even realize they're doing it when I'm just talking to them. Some people it is more formal, like my PhD supervisor, Peter Chung. I would definitely consider him a mentor, and Michelle Dowsey, my co-supervisor. They're definitely mentors to me in different ways and in a much more formal capacity, because we met more regularly. And as time went on, so the initial stage of the PhD, it was um, very pragmatic in terms of like, how do I do this? What do I need to do now? And later on, when I had my handle on the research stuff, you become more like a colleague, and it's more about thinking about the pragmatic aspects about the next steps, like applying for grants, applying for um, positions in university, or whatever you want to do. But so there is that pragmatic aspect, but there's also an aspect of just talking to them about life and how to fit in research, and where you want to take it and how to navigate certain obstacles and exciting opportunities that later down the track you might get offered multiple things, and you have to pick and choose which ones you really want to put your time into. I think it's important to me because people who are mentors, they're able to kind of guide you through certain things, but it's in a way that they are sort of helping you to find your own way. So they're not showing you like, you do this, you do that, because this is what I did. They're saying like, look, I faced these challenges. This is how I dealt with it. Take it or leave it. But you may find this helpful, or they just do that by example, and I'm able to see, okay, well, I'm faced with these challenges in my life. I've got to think about my situation and my preferences and how I'm going to navigate this, and I can sort of draw inspiration from them or see what they did and what I might like to do differently. So I think it's really important. And how did I find it? So I think there's formal ways to do it in terms of um, your PhD supervisors or even your advisory panel or just people that you work alongside who you do projects with, who you can either start to meet with regularly, whether you want to call it mentoring or not, just for a check-in to see how you're going with certain career aspects and to help guide you through some of those challenges or to help you to identify ways that you can navigate those challenges. And I think the key thing is that don't think that you need to find one mentor who's going to address all your needs and be the one person who you go to. So it could be multiple people. And sometimes it's much more formal and much more frequent than it is with others. So some people you might actually request and have signed up to a mentoring program at the University of Melbourne because I wanted to experience that sort of a formal, regular mentoring relationship. But it doesn't have to be like that. It can be infrequent conversations with people who you just catch up with in a more organic fashion and it kind of arises. And it functions as a mentoring relationship. Um, and there can be multiple people at different levels, some of whom you approach and say, I would like to be mentored by you, others who sort of fulfill that role and it never really has to be spoken. So I think I initially sort of approached my PhD supervisors. I don't know if I used the word mentor, but but I definitely would have seen them as mentors, and it was kind of baked into my PhD from meeting with them regularly and um, taking on increasing responsibilities over time and more complex sort of conversations and discussions around career progression, things like that. But then others, I would just say, be receptive to people in your life who just resonate with you and who you respect and you look up to, who you can actually see as mentors, and you kind of find them organically without having to necessarily enter into any sort of formal mentoring relationship. So I think be open to both formal and informal arrangements. Be willing to take the initiative with certain people if you feel it's appropriate to approach them, and also look out for formal opportunities to apply for mentoring programs where you can get matched with somebody. So there's multiple different ways you can do it, and it doesn't have to be just within the field of medicine. So you might find just people in your life who are in totally different walks of life who you can go to who can mentor you through life and not just research, but just other aspects of life. So yeah, that's I think mentoring is really important. I think it's a hard thing to define, but I think it's, once you have a mentor and you're in that sort of relationship, you know that it's a good thing and it can be really helpful. And you just got to be receptive and sometimes be active in pursuing those opportunities. So I think on the one hand, while I had very little formal experience or um, strictly speaking, any education in research prior to doing my first project, I think I mean, I'd done my undergraduate degree and I'd had a little bit of exposure to some of the skills that were important there. So some epidemiological studies and learning some techniques, not statistical techniques necessarily, but just getting some exposure to the sort of concepts that I would be encountering. Um, but then basically what I did was I took on my first research project and then I started to learn on the job, I guess you'd say. So I took on the project. My first project was writing up an RCT, but alongside that I was writing up and that was finishing off somebody else's project. So they had run the RCT and I was writing up the findings of publication. While doing that, I was leading my own systematic review and helping out a couple of other students with systematic reviews as well. So my first exposure was through doing research and also through reading a lot of papers for the systematic reviews that I was involved with. And that's how I got to appreciates just by broad exposure and repetition the sorts of concepts that were and the sorts of statistics that we used and the sorts of statistical software that we used to synthesize those findings just by reading a lot of papers. However, alongside that, also, when I commenced the PhD, I did take some time separately to start learning things that so the basics of statistics and epidemiology, and also that things that I would need to know for the things that I was doing right now, but also things that might just come in handy or just be good to understand if I'm getting involved in more research. So I basically got to the point where I split my learning in two ways. There was the on-the-job sort of ad hoc learning where if I didn't know how to do something in a statistical software or I didn't understand a particular concept, then I would look it up and read about it and try to troubleshoot on the fly. And that takes you a long way. And I think that's an important part of learning. But then there's also the sort of what I call the a priori kind of learning, where you learn according to a set curriculum, or you learn things based on what you think will be useful and what will come up. You may never use that knowledge necessarily, but that's the sort of thing that can really help you just understand more broadly. And you never know when you might use it for a particular project or when reviewing papers and trying to understand the evidence better. So, in light of that, in my the early days of the PhD, I tracked down a few textbooks. So I basically there's these days you're spoiled for choice and there's almost too much. It can be quite overwhelming and difficult to know exactly what you like, which is the best resource and which is the best one that might work for you, and especially because everybody's trying to sell these things, so it becomes really difficult. Everyone's making big claims that their software or whatever is the best one or the most successful. And then while I do think there's a lot of low quality resources out there that can lead you astray or can cost a lot of money and give you quite little return, I think we're sort of in an age where there are a lot of really good resources, and it doesn't really matter which one you use to a certain extent, as long as it's up to scratch in terms of it's run by people who are legitimate, they have experience and qualifications in these things, and then you have the variety so that you can pick what really suits you. So how this actually took shape was that after kind of floundering for a little bit at the start because I didn't have certain basic knowledges, like that piece of knowledge, like I knew what a t-test was, I knew basic things from my undergraduate degree, and I'd done one research methodology subject, but that was more in lab-based research. Um, I had to sort of figure out those basic things quite quickly just to catch up. But then I thought, well, how can I sort of get ahead of the curve here? And then there were a few things that I did. So one was that, and they're all free resources, and so one was that I figured out that I wanted to learn. I mean, you can learn all sorts of statistical software. And for me, for my particular type of research that I do, especially because I don't come from a programming background, but I'm also not a trained statistician, R I found was quite helpful as opposed to something like Python, which is more for people with a programming background, and Stata, which is more for people who are trained epidemiologists, and also has a cost associated with it. I found that R was very accessible, and there are a lot of an active learning community online with a lot of free learning resources. So there are textbooks that you can download or just access online for free, and learning resources, videos, all sorts of things where you can sort of get to know how to use it from people who are experts and who write the packages that you'll be using. And I found that extremely helpful. So I went through those textbooks both in the sense, as I said before, when I encountered problems, I would use those resources to learn things on the fly, but also I set myself a schedule to go through those and just take my time with it, read through, and they often have worked examples that you can go through that just give you a better handle on how to use the software and a better understanding of how it works and how you can avoid certain traps and how you can get it to do things more efficiently. which is really helpful, especially when you take on more projects and you can find a better, basically quicker way to do things. So that was very helpful. And then in this start of 2020, actually, I enrolled part-time in a graduate diploma of biostatistics. I dropped that after partway through the second semester because alongside the MD PhD, it was a bit too much. But I did the first two subjects, which was Epidemiology 1 and Introduction to Statistical Computing at University of Melbourne. It was encouraging the statistical computing subject. I already knew a lot of the content because you learn to use R and Stata as part of that program, as part of that course, and a lot of the content from R I already knew from my own learning. So that was encouraging, but I also learned a lot more and just better ways to do things, or at least just different ways to do things from that. And then in the epidemiology subject, I really just got to learn the concepts of learn the principles of data and analysis techniques and how you can get a statistical program to spit out numbers, and it can be very convincing and it can seem like it's legitimate when in reality you need to know what you're actually looking to achieve, and you need to have a way of verifying that what it's producing is actually accurate. So the two go hand in hand, learning the conceptual knowledge that you need and learning how to actually do the analysis. So if I were to sum that up and say, are there any prerequisites for research? I think the only prerequisite in terms of it is really you've got to have an interest in what you do. And I think from a clinician-researcher point of view, the reality is a lot of people are doing research to get points on their CV for a training program, or they're doing it for networking purposes, so they can get to know consultants or other people. They're doing it so they can present at conferences and get their name out there on the international stage or the national stage. Um, so there are those motivations, and then there are other people who really want to take it further. And I quickly identified I was one of those people. I really don't think there is a right or wrong way to do it. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do as little research as possible, but even then, I think you have to have enough of an interest in what you're doing, and you need to know that even if you want minimal involvement in research, it's still going to take time and it's going to take a lot of effort. So I think you need interest and you need staying power to really tough it out, because it can get really tricky and things aren't straightforward. Even though you have a good plan and you have good people around you, that you encounter all sorts of obstacles that you don't anticipate, and it's important to know how to navigate those and to be able to push through to the end. So I think if you've got those two things, then you'll go a long way. The other important thing is to have good people around you. So prerequisite for research, especially if you're considering a higher degree, but really any project where you're going to be approaching people who will be supervising you, is their track record. So make sure that you work with people who have an established track record in what they're doing. So if somebody wants to supervise a PhD, everyone has to do it for the first time, that's fine. But I'd say you'd at least want to be supervised by one person who has demonstrated their ability to supervise somebody from start to finish of a PhD, successful completion. And the more they've done that, the more it can give you peace of mind that they actually know what they're doing. Because there's a lot of people who are interested in research, but there's a lot more to it than doing interesting analyses and things that you might find fascinating. So you need people who really know how to navigate the complexities of it and the administrative aspects and the interpersonal aspects, because if you don't know, if you're not with people who know how to deal with those things, then you'll end up very frustrated with your progress or lack of progress, because you'll have all the interest and all the enthusiasm, but there's just certain realities that you have to face that you'll need to work with people who have been there before and who know how to navigate it. So yeah, staying power, interest, working with good people, and then the more pragmatic things, which is what I sort of led into this conversation with, was practical skills and knowledge. So, and I'd split that into two things, which is basically, yes, introductory statistical analysis programs or research methods programs, whatever your type of research is, whether it's qualitative, lab-based, statistics, computer science, whatever it is, have some prerequisite knowledge there. Talk to your supervisors about the sort of projects that you might be doing, and they'll be able to guide you to what you might need to know, and you can line it up that way. but I wouldn't be too worried about not having a high level of knowledge, because that might put you off doing these things. When in reality, if you're committed, you can make up that deficit. It might just take a bit more effort, but that's not the worst thing in the world.